Lieutenant Daniel Reynolds had been in space long enough to understand that the unknown was a constant companion. As a medic aboard the deep space exploration vessel the Horizon, he was used to odd encounters with alien species, but nothing could have prepared him for Nera. Nera was an Aryan, a species known for their calm, collected nature and their expertise in medicine. They were different from humans in many ways. Tall, with pale, almost luminous skin and eyes that shifted in color depending on their emotions. They didn't have hair like humans, but instead their heads were crowned with delicate, almost translucent tendrils that shimmered when caught in the light. She was quiet, focused, and, in Daniel's opinion, brilliant. Their first interaction had been unremarkable. She was assigned to the medical bay, and Daniel, a young human medic, had been told to familiarize himself with her. He was used to working with aliens, but there was something about Nera that made him uneasy. Perhaps it was her calm presence, or maybe it was the way her pale eyes seemed to see right through him, but something about her put him on edge. The ship was traveling through a quiet sector of space when Daniel found himself needing her assistance during a routine checkup. He had been running some diagnostics on the medical equipment when Nera walked in, her movements graceful, almost floating as she made her way toward him. "Need some help, Lieutenant?" she asked, her voice soft, yet clear. Daniel looked up, startled by how closely she had positioned herself beside him. He didn't quite understand how, but it felt like she had been watching him all along. Yeah," he stammered. "I'm just checking the systems here, but it's a bit beyond me. Could you—" Nera didn't need to wait for him to finish. She simply took over, her hands moving with practiced precision as she adjusted the settings on the medical interface. Daniel could barely keep up as she explained the intricacies of the system to him in a calm, measured tone. "There's a minor calibration issue," Nera said, her voice almost melodic. "It's common in these models, but it's an easy fix." Daniel watched her work, impressed. She was so different from him, so calm and composed in everything she did. The Aryan people were known for their analytical minds, but Nera's talent seemed to go beyond intellect. It was as if she could anticipate what was needed before anyone else even noticed. As she finished the task, Nera looked up at him, her eyes shifting from their usual pale blue to a gentle shade of violet. It was a subtle change, but Daniel noticed it. He was sure that his expression betrayed his thoughts. He felt something stirring inside him, a mix of admiration and perhaps something else. "Well, that's all fixed," Nera said, her voice bringing him back to reality. "You've done well here, Lieutenant." Daniel blinked. Thanks," he said, feeling suddenly flustered. "I still don't know what half of this stuff does, but I'm learning." Nera's lips quirked into a small smile, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know why, but the way her smile made her eyes shine brighter felt like something out of a dream. He quickly cleared his throat, trying to recover from the sudden feeling of warmth spreading through him. "Are you, sure you don't need anything else?" Daniel asked, eager to change the subject. "No," Nera replied, her smile widening, ever so slightly. "I think we're done here, Lieutenant." And then, as if to catch him off guard, she added, "I think you'll make a fine medic, Daniel." Daniel's mind raced. He wasn't sure if she was just being kind or if there was something more to her words. But before he could ask, she turned to leave the room, her movements smooth and graceful, as if she didn't have a care in the world. And that's when it happened. As she reached the door, Daniel, half joking, called out, "Yes, dear." It was meant to be playful, a casual comment like one might say to a friend or a sibling. It was a habit he had picked up over the years, something his mother used to say to him when she was joking around. But the words had slipped out before. He could stop them. He didn't think much of it at first. But then, to his surprise, Nera paused. She turned, her eyes locking onto his, and for a moment, Daniel's heart skipped again. Her expression was unreadable, and Daniel immediately felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm sorry. That was, uh, I didn't mean it like that," Daniel stammered, trying to backpedal. He hadn't expected her to take it seriously. Neera's lips curved up into a knowing smile, and for the first time since they met, Daniel saw a hint of playfulness in her eyes. "You're my mate, Daniel," she said simply. Daniel's mind went blank. He stared at her, not sure how to respond. What had she just said? His brain tried to process the words, but they didn't quite fit together in his mind. "Wait, what?" Daniel asked, suddenly feeling a wave of confusion and uncertainty. Neera stepped closer, her smile never faltering. "It is a custom of my people," she said calmly. "When we find someone we care for, we call them mate. It is a bond of respect and trust." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. This was not at all how he had expected the conversation to go. "Don't worry," Neera added, her voice soft. "I know it was a joke, but the meaning behind your words, it's understood." Still, confused, Daniel managed a nervous laugh. "Right, okay, I didn't know that about your culture." Neera nodded. "Many things are different, Daniel, but I think we'll have time to understand each other better." And with that, she turned and left the room, leaving Daniel standing there, still processing her words. As the door closed behind her, Daniel felt his heart race. What had just happened? He had joked, and yet something told him this encounter was just the beginning of something he couldn't quite comprehend. The next few days aboard the Horizon were filled with the usual routine of deep space travel, but Daniel couldn't shake the memory of Neera's words. "You're my mate, Daniel." They echoed in his mind, and he found himself replaying the moment over and over. At first, Daniel had thought it was just an innocent misunderstanding. After all, he had meant his words as a joke. But Neera hadn't laughed. She hadn't even looked surprised. Instead, she had smiled, almost knowingly, and explained it like it was a common phrase in her culture. A bond of respect and trust. Daniel was no stranger to different cultures. Being a medic on a ship that explored uncharted territories meant meeting various alien species. But this was different. He had never encountered an alien who had such a strong reaction to something so simple. Curiosity gnawed at him. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. Mate, was it possible that she was serious? Did she truly see him in that way? Daniel had no idea how to process it. It was one thing to share a professional relationship with an alien, but a personal one? That was a different territory entirely. For the next few days, he avoided Neera, hoping the awkwardness would fade. But every time he saw her, she greeted him with that same calm smile, her pale violet eyes glinting with a hint of amusement. It was like she was waiting for him to figure it out. Finally, one afternoon, he couldn't avoid her anymore. He had to know more. Neera was in the medical bay working on some supplies. Daniel hesitated for a moment before walking over to her. His heart beat faster as he approached. This was the moment he needed to clear things up. "Neera," he began, his voice a little too eager. "Can we talk for a minute?" Neera looked up from the supplies she was organizing, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Daniel. What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Daniel sat down across from her, trying to remain calm. "About what you said the other day. When you called me your mate." Neera's smile softened. "Yes?" He rubbed the back of his neck, unsure of how to continue. I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't mean it like that. I was joking when I said, 'Yes, dear.' And then you were joking," Neera interrupted gently. "But in my culture, the words you said have meaning. I understand that it was lighthearted on your part. But for me, it is not just a word. It is a recognition." "A recognition?" Daniel asked, confused. "Of what?" Of something deeper, Nira explained, her voice calm. In the Aryan culture, when we find someone we connect with, someone who shows us kindness and respect, we call them mate. It is a sign of trust, of potential partnership. Daniel blinked. So, it's not a joke? No, Nira said, her smile never fading. It is not a joke. Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing her words. But you don't even know me. I mean, we've worked together, sure, but we've hardly had a chance to really talk. That is true, Nira agreed. But in my culture, there is no need for long years of friendship before recognizing a connection. When someone feels a bond, it is acknowledged. I felt something when you said those words. A sense of respect, perhaps even admiration. Daniel felt a wave of heat rise to his cheeks. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said quickly. I just thought it was a harmless joke. Nira placed her hand on the table, her gaze steady. You did not make me uncomfortable. On the contrary, it made me smile. I have not seen a human who so openly shares his feelings, even in jest. Daniel felt the weight of her words. He had always been the type to keep his emotions close, especially when it came to his interactions with aliens. He had learned early on to keep things professional, not to cross any lines. But Nira's response was different. She wasn't offended. She wasn't put off by his humor. Instead, she seemed to appreciate it. But how does it work then? Daniel asked, leaning forward slightly. I mean, what happens now? Am I supposed to? You are not supposed to do anything, Daniel, Nira replied, her tone gentle but firm. In Aryan culture, it is not about expectations. It is about understanding. You may not feel the same way, and that is fine, but I wanted you to know what I meant. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, his mind still swirling. He had thought that joking around with Nira would have been a harmless way to pass the time. Instead, he had somehow stepped into something deeper, something more meaningful. I didn't realize it was such a big deal, he admitted, his voice low. I didn't mean to complicate things. Nira shook her head. It is not complicated. It is simple. I recognize the connection, Daniel. Whether or not you do is your choice. Daniel was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. He had always prided himself on being logical, on seeing the world through a practical lens. But now, sitting across from Nira, he was forced to question his own assumptions. Was it possible that he had been too closed off? Too focused on keeping things professional, on keeping his emotions at arm's length? Nira, Daniel said, his voice softer now. I don't know what to say. You do not need to say anything, Nira replied, her smile warm. Just know that in my culture, mate is a bond of understanding. I wanted to share that with you. Daniel nodded slowly. Thanks for explaining. I'll think about it. As he stood up to leave, Nira's calm voice followed him. Take your time, Daniel. There is no rush. And for the first time in days, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. The confusion wasn't gone, but he felt a strange sense of peace. Nira wasn't pushing him for anything. She wasn't expecting him to feel the same way. She had simply wanted him to understand. As he walked out of the medical bay, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Would he come to see Nira in the same way she saw him? Or would their relationship remain as it was, professional and respectful, with no deeper connection? One thing was certain. He wasn't going to look at her the same way again. The days on the horizon passed slowly, each one blending into the next as Daniel focused on his duties. He had tried his best to push aside the confusion he still felt after his conversation with Nira. They continued to work together in the medical bay. But now, Daniel couldn't help but notice the subtle differences in their interactions. There was something unspoken between them, a new layer of awareness that he couldn't ignore. Despite the lingering awkwardness, Daniel found himself increasingly drawn to Nira's calm presence. She was everything he wasn't: composed, serene, and unflappable even in the most stressful of situations. When they worked together, her gentle demeanor helped him stay focused, her voice a steady anchor in the chaos that sometimes came with the demands of deep space medicine. But that calm was about to be shattered. It began with a loud, unnerving sound that shook the entire ship. A deep rumble reverberated through the walls, followed by the warning lights flashing across the corridors. The horizon had entered a dense asteroid field, and several of the ship's shields had been compromised. The crew had only moments to react before the ship's hull began to breach in several locations, and the medical bay was suddenly flooded with injured crew members. Daniel had seen his fair share of crises, but this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The ship lurched again, throwing Daniel off balance as the sound of alarms blared through the corridors. His heart raced as he grabbed a medical kit and ran to the main emergency room. When he arrived, the scene was chaotic. Several crew members were already lying on the floor, blood dripping from deep gashes caused by flying debris. A few were unconscious, and others were struggling to stay awake, their faces pale and covered in sweat. Daniel immediately took charge, barking orders to the medical staff to triage the injured. But then he saw her. Neera was already at work, moving with a precision that made everything around her seem to slow down. She was kneeling beside a crew member whose arm had been badly shattered by a piece of the ship's wall, her hands gently setting the bone back into place with a level of expertise that left Daniel in awe. "Hold still," Neera said softly, her voice calm despite the chaos. "This will hurt, but you need to stay still." The injured crew member, a young officer named Ferris, gritted his teeth and nodded. His eyes were wide with fear, but Neera's touch seemed to ease his panic. Daniel watched, amazed at the ease with which Neera handled the situation. She was as calm as ever, never rushing, never panicking, just focused on saving lives. "Daniel, I need help here," Neera called out suddenly, pulling Daniel from his trance. Daniel rushed over to her side, finding a med kit already in her hands. She looked up at him with a nod of approval. "We need to stabilize Ferris. He's lost a lot of blood." "Right," Daniel said, trying to push his admiration for her aside as he grabbed the tools he needed. He quickly began working alongside her, setting up a blood transfusion and preparing the stabilizing equipment. The two of them moved seamlessly, their actions synchronized without a word. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, and the medical bay became a blur of activity. Daniel's hands worked fast, his mind racing as he tried to save the lives of his crewmates. He could feel the sweat pouring down his back, but he pushed through it, focusing solely on the task at hand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ferris's condition stabilized, and the immediate threat of further injuries began to lessen. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and stepped back, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "We did it," Daniel muttered, exhaustion setting in. Neera didn't answer immediately. She was still working, moving with the same calm, precise manner as before. It was as if nothing had changed for her, as if this crisis was just another day at the office. But Daniel noticed that her face was pale, the usual vibrancy in her eyes dimmed by the strain of the situation. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, suddenly concerned for her well-being. Neera glanced at him briefly, then back at the next patient. "I'm fine, Daniel. I've seen worse." But Daniel could tell she was pushing herself just as hard as he was. She wasn't immune to the stress of the situation, no matter how composed she seemed on the outside. "We need to get more supplies from the lower deck," Neera said, her voice steady but strained. "We'll be out of bandages and pain relievers soon." Daniel nodded. "I'll go." He didn't hesitate. There was no time for hesitation. He grabbed another kit and ran down the corridor toward the storage rooms. As he ran, he couldn't help but think about the way Neera had handled the crisis. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't hesitated. She had just gone to work, saving lives, without a second thought. When Daniel returned with the supplies, he found Nira already at work again, her hands moving quickly as she patched up another injured crew member. This time, there was no playful banter between them, no time for jokes. There was only the work, the life-saving work that had become their focus in this moment of chaos. It was then that Daniel realized something he hadn't fully understood before. He admired Nira, not just for her skills as a nurse, but for her ability to remain calm and steady under pressure. Her professionalism was unmatched, and her commitment to her crew was unwavering. For the first time, Daniel saw Nira not as the mysterious alien nurse who had thrown him off balance with her words, but as a fellow medic, someone who cared deeply about the lives around her, someone who would fight tooth and nail to save anyone in need. As the emergency situation slowly came under control, Daniel found himself standing beside Nira again, both of them covered in blood and sweat, but still standing strong. "We make a good team," Daniel said, his voice sincere. Nira looked at him, her eyes softening for just a moment. "Yes, we do." And in that moment, Daniel understood. Whatever had happened between them before, whatever awkwardness he had felt, it didn't matter now. They were more than just colleagues. They were partners, and that was all that mattered. The days following the crisis aboard the Horizon were quieter. The ship had been repaired, and the immediate danger was behind them. Yet, the events of the past week lingered in Daniel's mind. He couldn't forget the way Nira had handled the emergency with such calm precision. The bond that had formed between them during that chaotic time felt stronger than anything he had ever experienced. They continued their work in the medical bay, but now there was an unspoken understanding between them. Nira's smile was warmer whenever they worked together, and Daniel's respect for her deepened every time he saw her in action. The way she treated every crew member with care and attention, no matter their rank or species, was something Daniel admired. As they worked side by side, Daniel began to realize that Nira's culture was nothing like his own. She didn't seem to believe in the barriers that humans often built around emotions. Where humans were often guarded and cautious, Nira embraced feelings without hesitation. The way she spoke of connections, of mates, had once confused him, but now he started to see it in a new light. It wasn't about expectation or obligation. It was about recognizing the importance of a bond, no matter how it formed. One afternoon, while they were finishing up a routine check on a new batch of medical supplies, Daniel caught Nira glancing at him with a softness in her eyes. He had grown used to her subtle looks, but this one felt different. It was as if there was something more behind her gaze, something that went beyond their shared work. "What's on your mind, Nira?" Daniel asked, setting down the tools he had been organizing. The question was casual, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his voice. Nira hesitated for a moment, her tendrils shimmering slightly as she spoke. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "about what you said the other day. After everything that happened, I think it's important we understand each other more." Daniel raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "What do you mean?" Nira smiled, her violet eyes thoughtful. "I think there is something between us, Daniel. I know you may not see it the same way, but I would like for us to spend more time together. Not just as colleagues, but as friends," Daniel finished for her, his voice light, though there was a certain weight in his chest. "Yes," Nira said, her voice firm but kind. "Friends, and maybe more over time. But I don't want to pressure you into anything. I just think we're both capable of understanding each other in ways we haven't yet explored." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering her words. The idea of becoming more than just friends with Nira was both thrilling and frightening. He had never allowed himself to get close to anyone in such a way, especially not with someone from another species. But Nira's honesty, her openness, made him reconsider his own fears. "I've never really been good at this," Daniel said slowly, almost as if talking to himself. "I've always kept my feelings to myself, you know. I've never let anyone get too close. But maybe I'm ready for something different." Nira nodded, her gaze softening. "I understand. It's not easy, but we don't have to rush into anything, Daniel. We can take our time. We can learn from each other slowly." Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had been worried that Nira was expecting something from him that he wasn't ready to give. But she wasn't. She simply wanted to connect, and that felt like a relief. As they continued their work, there was a new energy between them. It was subtle, but it was there, an understanding that hadn't been present before. They spoke more during their breaks, sharing stories about their respective cultures and lives before joining the crew. Daniel learned that Nira had been trained in multiple fields of medicine, her species known for their vast knowledge in biology and healing. He shared stories of Earth and how humans, though young in the grand scheme of the galaxy, had managed to survive and thrive through adversity. Nira listened intently, her curiosity never waning. She asked questions about Earth's history, about human emotions, about how the species managed to stay connected despite everything they had been through. It was clear that she respected humanity in a way that Daniel hadn't expected. She didn't see humans as primitive or inexperienced, as some species did. To her, humans were fascinating, full of potential. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Daniel and Nira found themselves in the ship's observation lounge, staring out at the stars. It was a place where they could find a brief moment of peace amid the constant activity of space exploration. The stars outside sparkled like diamonds, distant and cold, yet beautiful in their own way. "I never really get used to this," Daniel said, his voice quiet as he leaned back in his chair. "The vastness of it all. It's hard to believe we're even here." Nira sat beside him, her eyes following his gaze. "It is strange, but beautiful too. Space has a way of making you realize how small you are, how insignificant, yet at the same time, it shows you how much you can accomplish if you work together." Daniel turned to look at her, surprised by the depth of her words. He had always thought of space as something cold and impersonal, something that only highlighted humanity's smallness. But Nira saw it differently. To her, space was a reminder of potential, of what could be achieved if people came together. "That's a nice way of looking at it," Daniel said, smiling slightly. "I guess I've always been a little more cynical about it." Nira smiled back, her eyes warm. "That's okay, Daniel. Cynicism is often a result of experience, but it's also important to remember the good things, the things that bring us together." For a long while, neither of them spoke. There was a comfortable silence between them, one that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Daniel found himself thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Only a few weeks ago, he had been avoiding Nira, unsure of how to handle their growing connection. Now it felt like they were in sync, like they were starting to understand each other in ways he hadn't thought possible. As the stars outside continued to shine, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. There was still so much he didn't know, so much he had to learn about Nira, about herself, and about what it meant to truly connect with someone. But he was ready to find out, and for the first time in a long while, he was no longer afraid. The days aboard the Horizon felt like they were passing more quickly now. Daniel and Nira had grown into a comfortable routine, their work together in the medical bay efficient and harmonious. It was no longer just the two of them carrying out their tasks. There was an ease in their movements, a shared understanding that made everything seem simpler. But even as they worked well together, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something more was growing between them. It was there, lingering beneath the surface of their professional relationship, something he could no longer ignore. The time they spent together, talking during their breaks, sharing stories of their cultures, had built something in Daniel that he hadn't expected. It was a quiet connection, something neither of them had rushed into, but something undeniable. All the same, the bond between them felt real now, stronger than before. And yet, despite the clarity of it, Daniel still hesitated. Nira had never pressured him. She hadn't expected him to rush into anything. She was patient, calm, always ready to listen when he needed to talk. But Daniel could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them. He had been avoiding it, unsure of what to do with the emotions that had been growing inside him. But now, he knew it was time. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was just fine. Something had changed. Something was different. One evening after their shifts, Daniel found himself walking with Nira along the ship's long corridors. They had been assigned a small break before their next task, and as they walked, the ship's artificial lights cast long shadows across the floor. The quiet hum of the ship was the only sound that accompanied them. "Daniel," Nira said, her voice breaking the silence. He looked at her, meeting her gaze. There was something in her eyes, something vulnerable that made his heart race. "I've been thinking." He could feel his pulse quicken. The last time she'd said those words, it had led to a conversation about their bond. This time he wasn't sure where it would go, but he couldn't deny the nervous flutter in his chest. "What have you been thinking about?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Nira took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. "I know we've been taking things slowly, and I appreciate that. But I feel that what we have is something special. I don't want to rush anything, but I also don't want to let this opportunity pass us by." Daniel felt his throat go dry. His heart thudded in his chest. This was it. She was saying exactly what he had been afraid to say. The words he had been holding back, the words he wasn't sure he was ready to hear, were coming from her now. "I feel the same way," Daniel said, his voice soft. It was like the weight of the universe had lifted off his shoulders. "I've been scared, Nira. I've never been good at this kind of thing. I've always kept people at a distance." Nira nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know, but you don't have to be afraid with me, Daniel. We don't need to have everything figured out right away. We can take our time. What matters is that we're honest with each other." Her words, so simple and so sincere, struck a chord in Daniel's heart. All this time, he had been afraid of something he didn't fully understand, afraid to open himself up to someone, especially to someone so different. But Nira wasn't asking him to be someone else. She was asking him to be honest, to trust her. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he could. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Nira, I think I've known for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it." She tilted her head slightly, her tendrils shimmering in the soft light. "What is it, Daniel?" He reached out and gently took her hand in his, a gesture that felt more natural than anything he had done in weeks. "I think I'm ready. I'm ready to let someone in. I'm ready to be honest, to let you be part of my life. Fully." Nira's eyes softened, and for a moment, everything else in the world seemed to fade away. She didn't speak right away, but her smile said everything. It was gentle, warm, and full of understanding. Then, without a word, she leaned in, her lips brushing his in a soft, tentative kiss. It was everything Daniel had feared, and everything he had hoped for. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't overwhelming. It was simple, filled with a quiet promise. When they pulled back, Nira's smile was soft, her eyes reflecting something deeper than words could express. "I'm glad," Nira said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." Daniel smiled, his chest tightening with emotions he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. I guess I was just waiting for the right person to show me it was okay to take a chance. Nira squeezed his hand. And I'll be here, Daniel, whenever you're ready to take the next step. For a moment, neither of them said anything, content to simply stand there together. The weight of everything that had passed between them was now gone, replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. They had crossed a threshold, one that Daniel hadn't been able to see before, but now he understood. They didn't need to rush. They didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was that they had taken the first step together, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he could breathe, like he could finally move forward. "I'm glad it's you, Nira," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm glad it's you, too," Nira replied, her voice full of certainty. And as they stood together in the quiet corridor of the ship, with the stars stretching out in front of them, Daniel knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, he was ready. He wasn't alone anymore. Days turned into weeks, and as the Horizon continued its voyage through space, the bond between Daniel and Nira only deepened. What had begun as a simple connection, something neither of them fully understood, had now blossomed into something more. It wasn't just about their work together or the moments they shared between shifts. It was the way they supported each other, the way they cared for one another without needing to say much. They understood each other in ways neither could explain, and it felt like something unique, something worth holding on to. The ship was still in the middle of its exploration mission, traveling through uncharted space, but Daniel found that the journey now had more meaning. Every day felt like an opportunity to learn something new, not just about the universe around him, but about Nira and himself. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and laughing. Sometimes they simply sat in the observation lounge, watching the stars go by, enjoying the silence between them. One evening, as they sat together by a large window overlooking the endless expanse of space, Nira spoke softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Daniel," she began, her voice carrying a hint of something she hadn't said before, something deeper. "Do you ever think about what's beyond all of this? About the future?" Daniel turned his head to meet her gaze. He could see a slight vulnerability in her eyes, a rare moment where she wasn't the calm and composed Nira he had come to know. "I think about it a lot," Daniel replied, his voice quieter than usual. "I used to worry about the future, about what would happen next, or whether things would work out. But now I'm not so sure it's something to worry about anymore." Nira's eyes softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his. "I understand. We can't control everything, but I've learned that it's okay to embrace the unknown, to take things one step at a time." Daniel nodded slowly. "I've learned that too, with you." He paused, letting his words settle between them. "Before I met you, I was so focused on the what-ifs and the maybes. I never allowed myself to truly enjoy the present, to let go of my fears. But you've shown me that it's okay to just be, to let things happen as they're meant to." Nira smiled, her tendrils shimmering slightly as she leaned closer. "We've learned from each other, haven't we? I've always known that connection is important. But with you, I've found a deeper understanding of what that truly means, not just between species, but between individuals." Daniel felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had never felt so understood, so seen by anyone. With Nira, there were no expectations, no judgments. She accepted him as he was, flaws and all, and he did the same for her. He took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad we met, Nira. I think this is just the beginning of something special." Nira's smile grew, and there, was something in her eyes that made Daniel's heart swell with a mix of affection and gratitude. "It is," she agreed softly. "There's so much ahead of us, and I'm happy to walk that path with you." For the first time, Daniel realized just how much had changed since their first encounter. They had started as two strangers, each from different worlds, unsure of how to connect. But now they were partners in every sense of the word. Their bond wasn't defined by rules or expectations. It was simply there, something that had grown naturally over time. As the days passed, their connection became stronger. They worked side by side, handling medical emergencies, assisting with the ship's crew, and navigating the unknown reaches of space together. They learned from each other, laughed together, and found joy in the smallest moments. No longer were they just colleagues. They were something more, something deeper, and they both knew it. One afternoon, while they were taking a break in the observation lounge, the captain of the Horizon called for an all-crew meeting. The mission was entering a new phase, and there were important decisions to be made about the direction they would take. When the meeting ended, Daniel and Neera found themselves walking back to the medical bay, discussing the new information. "What do you think?" Neera asked, her voice thoughtful as they walked side by side. "I think it's exciting," Daniel said, his eyes bright. "This mission, it's what we've been working toward. A new chapter for all of us." Neera nodded, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "It is. But, Daniel, I've been thinking about what's next. After all of this, what happens when we reach the end of the journey?" Daniel looked at her, his heart racing a little. He knew what she was asking, and he didn't have to think twice about his response. "We'll keep moving forward," Daniel said firmly. "Together. I'm not letting go of this, of us." Neera's expression softened, and she squeezed his hand. "That's all I needed to hear." The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Daniel felt ready to face whatever. Challenges came their way. The future didn't seem so scary anymore, not with Neera by his side. There were still many unknowns, many adventures to be had, but now it wasn't about fearing what might happen. It was about embracing what they could create together. As they walked down the hall, their steps in sync, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The stars outside seemed a little brighter, the unknown a little less intimidating. Because, with Neera, he knew they would face everything together, and that was all that mattered.